Part 2.
Fascism.
A common question that comes up when we're talking about taking direct action against fascism is, how do we decide who's a fascist? And there are two ways of asking this question. One is very, very helpful and clever, and the other one isn't so much. The not very helpful way of asking this question is, how do we decide who's a fascist? With the implied answer being that we can't, and therefore anti-fascist action is moot and off the table. The reason that isn't very helpful is that it stops anybody really learning anything. It's kind of the end of the conversation, and it also allows fascists to carry on. People who ask this version of the question usually want some abstracted, foolproof answer or some formula for definitely identifying a fascist, which obviously stacks the deck against a theory that is local and specific and flexible in its application. The clever way of asking the question...
And also, remember everything I was saying last time about fascism being deliberately and inherently an incoherent philosophy based on ignoring the principles of reason developed in the Enlightenment that include the principle that you should make a logical argument for your position.
So, I do not remember. That's one of those things
Okay.
I do not remember.
Yeah.
But you're saying that fascism, it's an ideology that doesn't have a strong logical
a logical component. I mean that's true. I think what I'm trying to say is larger than that. You can go back and rewatch the other thing if you want, or I mean it'll get touched on again at some point, I'm sure. But yeah, basically it's hard to pin down what a fascist believes, because again, fascism is principally just us versus them, and any means that gets us there is fine. So yeah, that's another part of why it's so hard to pin down what fascism is, because it can come up in so many different forms, and there can be so much open debate over what it really is, because it isn't just white people exerting it. It isn't just racism.
Right.
It can come out in a lot of different forms, and there's no consistent politics behind it. And there's I don't know how much you remember last time, but like I was saying last time, it's fairly easy to identify who's socialist and or communist and anarchist, because one, they're more likely to just identify themselves. Like what he was saying earlier, the fascists actively don't want to be identified as fascists. So there's literal hundreds of euphemisms for modern fascism.
Right.
Like neo-Nazi, white supremacist, race realist, they get really dumb and obscure just so they don't have to identify with the bigger group of fascism. And alternatively, or in the same line, I guess, communism and anarchism is a very where it was developed is mostly in universities and stuff. So you have a lot of written down theory that you can go read, and this is exactly what Marxist-Leninist communism is, or this is exactly what anarchism in its generally accepted version is. Yeah. And on the right, there are right-wing philosophers, but you don't get that same kind of reasoning.
Right. Would you say that fascism is like Antifa in this sense that you can be a fascist, but like you said, it's people don't want to identify as that, so it's.
Oh, are you saying because Antifa members wear masks and stuff?
No, I'm just thinking because Antifa is he said it's you can't be it's not like a membership thing. It's not a club. It's not.
Well, I mean that's not by design. It's just how it happens. It's just a word that means anti-fascist. So anyone doing anti-fascist action is Antifa.
Okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I see what you're saying. That's right. It's not a political leaning, it's a response to a political leaning.
Yeah, basically. And it's highly correlated with a lot of political leanings. Yes. And there are a lot of interesting ways that fascism and communism mirror each other, but to say that they're opposites or parallels or anything puts them on an intellectual footing that's too close to each other for my taste, I think.
To say that they're opposites is to connect them too much?
Well, I don't know. To say that they're direct opposites is I guess to dignify fascism too much.
Oh, I see.
Like they
Okay.
are. There's a lot of interesting parallels between them, but those
Right.
parallels extend
Yeah.
to one being based on reason and going forward and
Right.
like having consistent ideology, and one based on obfuscation and just going backward toward tradition any means necessary.
Okay. So okay, I see what you're saying.
All right,
let's go. Ready.
Question is, how do we decide who's a fascist and use that as a jumping off point to learn more about fascism and how to spot it? And that's the way we're going to ask the question. The word fascist is often used to just mean authoritarian or aggressive, but that's not the most helpful way of using it, because it allows people to draw a false equivalence between the authoritarianism of, say, Lenin with the authoritarianism of Hitler. Although both were authoritarian, they went about it in very different ways for very different reasons, and only one can accurately be called a fascist. Since fascism has been around for about 100 years now, it's had a few different versions. It's an essentially conservative ideology, all about preserving some mythologized version of the way things used to be, or restoring past glory to make a glorious future. In general, fascism is
like
characterized
making America
by being
great
less
again.
fond of democracy
Exactly, yeah.
and more fond of dictatorship.
One quick thing I meant to say earlier doesn't really fit now, but when this is the problem with like when Trump is saying he's going to outlaw Antifa, or like put Antifa as a terrorist organization, is the fact that it's not an organization means
Right.
Well, how do you enforce that except by like opposing anyone who opposes fascism, and then
Right.
once you are not
Yeah.
allowed to oppose fascism under
Right.
penalty of being a terrorist, like
Yeah.
kind of
Now,
stuff.
would you say that was him being like being a fascist, or just not having an understanding of Antifa?
Okay, so in the modern times, there's not really that many fascist politicians, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least not in America. There's no self-identifying fascist politicians, and there aren't that many self-identifying fascist intellectuals. So basically, what I'm going to mean anytime we're talking about fascism is going back to what I said last time about speech acts. It's less about what you're saying and what you're saying you believe, as much as what you are doing by saying something. And in that respect, Trump is absolutely doing a fascism when he'll say that there's good people on both sides, or anything like that, any kind of dog whistling. Like, you know basically what dog whistling is, right?
What is dog whistling?
So it's basically
I've never heard of that.
Okay, so it's it'll touch on it later in this video more.
Okay.
But yeah, it's basically I think it is succinct. So basically, an uncontroversial statement that's meant to like prime certain people to be like, oh, I see what you're saying. I'm actually on your side. But so it's basically like a substitute. It's a dog whistle will be the principal form of a speech act that isn't what it's doing. I can't think of a good example. This video definitely covers it, so we'll get back to it. Yeah.
It sounds good. Sounds good.
All right.
Very pro-military and pro-police. The state.
This list is good to
particularly in ways
internalize.
that encourage
Hold on, we didn't.
narrow views
The dog whistling was a tangent, but I don't think we finished what I said. We were talking about Trump.
So basically, yeah. So there's a speech act distinction there between if you're actually calling yourself a fascist, or if you are by your words and actions spreading fascism and allowing people who do actively identify as fascists to carry on and grow in strength.
Right.
And by that definition, Trump is absolutely doing that. So
yeah.
I'm gonna try to refrain. I mean, maybe I'm not actually. I was gonna say I'm gonna try to refrain from calling people fascist, but I don't think I can hold to that. But it's more useful to specify an action as being fascist or not.
Right.
And when you say an action is fascist, you don't mean it's fascist. You mean it is growing fascism.
Okay. But so back to the original question I asked.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't think so Trump wasn't saying that as a fascist, he was just saying something that spread that allow, like, helps fascism.
All I'm saying, I'm not saying he's not guilty of. All I'm saying is it's not a useful discussion to go into. Is Trump actually a fascist?
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. That's fair.
Doesn't matter. He is growing fascism. and we can cut the argument there. There's nothing useful to be gained by looking at the quality of his soul. Like,
yeah, it's you know, the implications of his words,
Mhm.
and, you know. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's not many other options beyond idiot or fascist.
Yes. Now, so you said that this list here is internalized?
No, I
Or
think
what-
you should internalize it. Like,
okay.
This is a good definition of.
This is a good. Okay.
Yeah.
This is a good map for this. Okay.
Mhm.
Can we start it over then?
All
When
right.
he's, like,
It's still on screen. I don't think he's said much.
That's fair. That's fair. That's
I'm
fair.
worried
I can
about.
read.
All right.
Yes.
Just fast back a bit.
And
There you go.
pro-police. Pro the state, particularly in ways that encourage narrow views of nationalism and patriotism, often in xenophobic ways or ways that tie nationalism to race. Pro-toxic masculinity, according to which straight cis men should be dominant over and violent towards people of other genders. Pro-capitalism, and hand in hand with that, very anti-communist, and particularly relevantly for today's fascism, virulently racist against people of colour, and very anti-Semitic. Those last two go hand in hand, as we'll be seeing later. The historian
All right.
Robert
Now, what
Paxton
is
gives a good
imperial?
overview.
Like
He
how
says-
does imperialism look in terms of like foreign policy today? Like, what does that look
Basically
like?
exerting your will over any other country.
Oh, okay. So just yeah.
So, but okay, so that will include a lot of things that aren't imperialism, because there's a lot of positive ways that you can help other countries. But I mean, like, going into other countries with only your own business interests in mind. So, like, the war in Iraq, not about spreading democracy or peace, about getting oil and resources and such. All the Chile and Bolivia stuff that we haven't talked about, but I've been spending 48 hours in. So but like, that's imperialism, is like funding the CIA to go into another country and install a fascist dictator who will be friendly to your business interests.
Okay. Are we gonna watch this whole video? 'Cause we will probably not finish it today.
All right.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, nothing we could do about it.
Yeah, I mean that's true. Because I do want to finish the video. I was just like, we're only 10 minutes into it.
Yeah.
Honestly.
All right.
But it's good. This is good. This is a good way to absorb it all. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to like meet sooner than like next Wednesday, like this weekend
Yeah.
or something?
Let's double it up. I think we
All
should.
right.
I think we should.
Very cool.
Do you want to maybe for now we can shoot for like Sunday?
Sure. Yeah.
Cool.
Fascism is a form of political behaviour marked by obsessive preoccupation with community decline, humiliation, or victimhood, and by compensatory cults of unity, energy, and purity in which a mass-based party of committed nationalist militants working in uneasy but effective collaboration with traditional elites abandons democratic liberties and pursues with redemptive violence and without ethical or legal restraints goals of internal cleansing and external expansion. The collaboration with traditional elites bit is important there. In my country, there's a popular image of fascists as uneducated or working-class skinheads, but that's increasingly outdated. As we'll be seeing later, many of today's fascists are educated, wealthy, and polished. Some of these features might be emphasized more than others. For instance, contemporary Euro-American fascism leans hard on the white supremacy angle. There were 20th century Chinese and Japanese versions of fascism that obviously didn't subscribe to that bit. Not everybody who has one or two of these features is necessarily a fascist, and fascists know that if they can find ways in which they can appear to not fit all of them all the time, they might be able to fool you. Like, we can't be fascist, we've got a black person or a gay person in our movement. Kind of like the old, I can't be racist because I have a black friend movement. I can't be sexist because I have a wife and a daughter.
Maybe that's not tokenism.
But in general, these are the hallmarks.
It's extreme tokenism.
It's important to note that fascism is not
Same
a
principle.
wholly different kind of government from the one you might know, and it did not end in 1945. For instance, most of these features I described would also, in milder forms, describe a certain American presidency. That's right. The Reagan administration, which actually was so okay with fascism that it actually supported fascist governments with money and weapons, for instance in Guatemala. Something else worth bearing in mind is that this form of government based on racist
I just want
violence...
to... He really paused. He knew... I'm sorry, that was a very... This guy's funny, I like him.
Exploitation That's a story that a lot of indigenous people and black people have heard before, which is why you might also see some people describe Euro-American fascism as colonialism brought home. For reasons I've explained here, fascism grows quite effectively within liberalism, and that can be a gradual process. Fascism is not an all-or-nothing deal. Like many of the most interesting things in life, it's a sliding scale, not a binary. Hence, the problem we started with, right? How do we identify fascists and distinguish them from ordinary conservatives and even from just slightly more right-wing liberals? Another issue compounding this is that people used to openly identify as fascists or Nazis, but the words, rightly, have so much negativity attached to them nowadays that hardly anybody does. And so fascists will say they're not fascist, just as racists will say they're not racist, and bullies will say they are not bullies. If we confine our anti-fascist activities only to those who openly identify as fascist, we'll miss some of the most dangerous ones, as we'll be seeing later on. But if you know the features of fascism, and particularly in Europe and North America, if you understand white supremacist ideas, both for what they are and what they pretend to be, you'll be more easily able to spot fascist ideas when people are spreading them. I'll teach you more about white supremacy a little bit later on. But even if we know the hallmarks of fascism, you might well say that the contents of someone's heart are hard to know. Whether somebody really believes in a political cause or is just going with the flow, or especially on the internet if they are just a quote ironic fascist, not always easy to tell. So maybe an even cleverer way of framing the question is less who is a fascist and more who is doing a fascism. Who in the local community is building fascism or spreading fascist ideas in a particular place at a particular time that we can organise against. If we know the hallmarks of fascism, it's a lot easier to tell when someone is building it, whether they really intend to or not. For anti-fascists, it's less about whether they're a good person or what they have in their hearts, and more about what is the political effect their actions are having. That said, it's still possible to make mistakes. If you're going to be out there taking anti-fascist action, particularly at a protest where it can be disorienting and there's a lot of things going on, it's possible that people might get the brunt of something that wasn't really meant for them. In fact, that mole I mentioned earlier who infiltrated fascist groups in London and America, he got pepper sprayed in the face by an anti-fascist protester whilst pretending to be a fascist, which is... Thankfully, he's completely fine. Anti-fascists know, of course, that mistakes are possible, which is why decisions about tactics are made locally and flexibly. If you go to a protest, not necessarily an anti-fascist one, but just about any protest, you'll often find people who are among the protesters, but trying to de-escalate things. Anti-fascists know about this problem, they do think about it, which is why such a large part of anti-fascist action is gathering intelligence. It's also very worth noting that although it's true anti-fascists could hit the wrong target, that is something that is also true of, and comes true far more often and destructively for, the army and the police. That doesn't mean we can't play the innocent bystanders card, but if we are going to play it, we should play it consistently. So, now that you know the features of fascism, you'll be able to see through a very common mistake. People sometimes draw a false equivalence between anti-fascist actors and fascists, weirdly. You might have seen people, including the President of the United States, saying that both sides are the same, or that if you resist fascists, you're the real fascist. There's that fake quote from Churchill saying that the fascists of the future will call themselves anti-fascist. He never actually said that, and even if he did, it wouldn't matter, because it would still be wrong in this case. And you can also find memes saying that anybody who wears a mask in public is bad, which I like to call the J. Jonah Jameson approach to political critique.
So fucking
also,
funny.
here's a completely unrelated picture of some riot police. Now that you know what fascism is, you'll be able to see through this false equivalence. Since anti-fascist actors tend to be pro-peaceful foreign policy, pro-community, pro-workers' rights, feminist and anti-racist, they are obviously not ideologically the same as fascists, who you'll remember are all about state violence, capitalism, nationalism, and being racist.
Okay, why do people doing Antifa things wear masks? Or do they always, or is that just like a rare, you know what I mean?
They don't always. I wouldn't say it's rare. I also wouldn't say I have much experience on the subject, honestly. Like, anytime, this is kind of a side note, but anytime we're talking about like real world statistics of like what populations are doing, it's always a bit hard to define because like I have no actual experience, right?
Right.
And, like I'm just listening to people who construct their own versions of the public. And whatever the ratio is, but like if I have 8 people saying all the Antifa wear masks and 2 people saying a few of them do, you can't average that. There's no
Right.
way to distinguish
Right.
what's actually
I guess
true
my
there.
main question then
Yeah.
is just why.
No, okay, so I'm getting back to that.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically we don't live in the best state, and you often don't want to be identified as a leftist.
Oh, so anonymity, right? Got it.
Yeah. So
right.
Like in the US, you could be fired for no and or any reason.
Correct.
Fascists will look for people to follow. If there's anyone who's actively participating in something and is known, if everybody's wearing a mask except you, you're more likely to be targeted to see if they can get your identity, so then they can get into the rest of the anti-fascists. The police will also benefit from knowing your identity more than you will benefit from the police knowing your identity. So yeah, I think that covers it, I think.
Yes, it does. All right.
You'll also see people, for instance Dinesh D'Souza, say that the Nazis were left-wing because National Socialism has socialism in the name. In fact, this was a deliberate ruse. Genuine socialism, where the workers control the economy, was big in 1920s Germany and represented the main rival political force to the Nazis. So they co-opted socialist rhetoric to appear more left-wing and tie their brand, if you like, to something that was already popular. In fact, when the Nazis came to power, they banned trade unions and privatized large sections of the economy, so the opposite of socialism. Nazi propaganda sent the message that Marxism is a secret plot by Jews to control the world, and at several points in Mein Kampf, Hitler unambiguously condemns socialism. Another crucial difference is that whereas a socialist would analyse society in terms of class, the Nazis analysed it in terms of race, or people, or Volk. All of which is why the Nazis killed so many socialists. You know that famous poem by Martin Niemöller that starts, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I wasn't a socialist"? Well, the reason it says that is because they did. Another sneaky trick that fascists are using at the moment is saying that fascism definitely isn't racist because Mussolini's fascism supposedly wasn't, and they support this by selectively quoting Mussolini. This is a lie that's been peddled since at least the 1980s, designed to try and make fascism appealing again by crowbarring Mussolini and Hitler apart. We'll be talking about propaganda
Mussolini
shortly.
didn't
In fact,
feed people gasoline until they diarrheaed themselves to death. Okay.
You got some nice facts there, yeah.
I'm sorry, that's one of my like permanently retained
nice
dictatorship facts.
Oh, that's a good one to have.
I like that one a lot because it's horrible and I can't even believe it. So
I should put that in my politics talk.
I you know what? Yeah. I think that's a highlight. I think.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't often contribute intellectually, but when I do, it's intense.
Yeah.
So cool. All right, sorry.
As early as the 1920s, Italian fascists were repeating white supremacist ideas, as well as producing anti-Semitic propaganda, laws restricting the freedom of Jews, and building concentration camps. In the early 20th century, socialism was a major political force, not just in Germany, but in a lot of other places as well. Particularly after the Russian Revolution of 1917, a lot of people and political parties had hope that capitalism and all the nasty working conditions and the unfairness and the exploitation and the war and disease and the poverty that had come with industrialization might collapse like any day now. And a lot of early 20th century leftists, including Marxists, saw early fascism and said, oh, it's just the rich capitalists using more aggressive measures to try and oppress the working class and stop us from building socialism. And to an extent they were correct. A lot of early 20th century liberals and rich people supported fascism precisely because it was so anti-socialist and anti-communist. But what those early 20th century Marxists didn't quite anticipate was just how big the racial element of fascism would become. Fascists weren't just working with rich capitalists in order to keep the working class in their place, they were dividing the working class along racial and national lines and making them fight each other instead of fighting the rich. Which is why, to this very day, socialists and fascists really do not get on.